Hello out there in YouTube land.
Welcome back to our channel.
Today we thought we'd have another entry into our wonderful bad movie reviews.
Yeah, this one's a good one.
It's one of our favorite ones to rant about, actually.
It is, and we even, made up a little jingle for it.
We did. So, we're going to talk about The Witch today.
And it was, that was, one of those things that we were super excited to actually go see.
Because Stephen King had made this big post online about how it was, like, the best horror film he'd seen in ages.
It was supposed to be, super creepy, and it kind of fell flat to me.
It was basically a 2.5 hour History Channel special on the life of the Puritans?
Especially in, it wasn't even really set in the time of the witch trials, per se, in Salem.
No.
It was around that time, kind of a vague time, where the hysteria was still there, obviously, in New England. But it was really just a look at Puritan life.
Yes.
At the time, which was not anything pleasant.
No. And, I get the trying to be historically accurate.
Right.
But when most of your movie is literally just day in, day out, oh, the crop failed. Oh, how are we going to eat? Let's mix mud. Come on.
Yeah, and hitting on kind of all those things that, clearly if your cow is producing bloody milk, it's mastitis. It's not something else, or it's a milk fever.
Now, granted, back during that time, they probably would think there was some sort of supernatural reason for the cow having major problems. But, instead of using those things to intensify the suspense, which is what you normally do in a horror film,
right,
they just kind of had that happen and then, oh, well, let's tell the crop some more, and not even, do anything with it.
And, enter the goats. These goats were being used for, I believe it was, milk, cheese, butter, things like that. But there was a significance to a particular goat based on the fact he just had a black coat.
Yeah. So they called the goat Black Phillip, which, a lot of people, I think, got into the whole Black Phillip thing because they even made a Funko Pop.
We own it.
Yes. And it's adorable.
It's adorable.
But, the whole thing is that these kids run around singing a song about Black Phillip, which, if you know children at all, they were fucking bored.
Yeah, that's essentially it. They made up a song about their goat. And what was interesting to me is when they're talking through this movie and they decide that the eldest daughter has to be a witch.
For whatever reason, which of course, if you know anything about the Salem witch trials, they didn't really need a reason to decide if somebody was witch or not. So, okay, I get that part.
And it was, you did see a lot of people in the Salem witch trial turn on each other, and in her family turn on each other, but not that close of a family?
Not like that,
Not like that.
And the fact that, just the whole thing went through, and it got so, at least for Tabby and I, so laughable, we made the jingle, which was essentially combining the 1970s song Black Betty with Black Phillip.
With Black Phillip.
So it's like, oh, Black Phillip, ram-a-jam. So you can do that forever. But, the whole point of it is, if it's going to be a scary movie, you're supposed to do things to increase the suspense and make people wonder, is she a witch or isn't she a witch? And I think this movie really failed in that because, number one, it was boring.
It was boring, but two, where it failed is that the actress that portrayed the elder daughter, her role was so normal day that it never once suggested anything, and then she finally decided, you know what, life went to hell, so I'm going to sell my soul to Black Phillip.
Which somehow that became the devil, which, in terms of the progression of the film, still doesn't make any sense. I get the idea of, the fact that, traditionally the devil has cloven feet and all this other stuff, and, goats are supposed to be related to the devil and this, that, and the other thing. The problem with it in respect to this movie, though, is that if you're going to have something that's supposed to create an emotional response out of your
Right.
viewer, then you need to have specific progressions and climaxes that make sense to the story. Whereas in
Yes.
this, they would have, days upon days of nothing, and then, oh, the youngest son kind of gets lost in the woods, and old witch woman supposedly hurts him, except there's nothing there, so you don't know whether or not it's like a figment of their imagination or something actually happened to him, when in reality he was left out in the cold for several hours and probably had hypothermia.
And the reality, too, the younger children, kind of the middle children in the movie, constantly misbehaved, wouldn't do their chores. There was never a punishment on them, which, if you know Puritan society and history of that,
They would have been nailed.
they would have been punished.
It would have been, at the very small ends, spankings.
Yes.
But back then, you're talking about paddles, you're talking about, even worse things than that. Like, just read history. You can find out what ways children were punished back then. But it was extreme corporal punishment. It doesn't bear any resemblance to how children are punished today.
No.
And so that was a issue with the movie because it didn't make sense historically. They spent all this time on supposedly being extremely horrifically historically accurate to the point where you're ready to claw your eyes out, at least for me. And instead, they let the kids get by with murder, essentially.
Yeah.
And when in that time, everybody would have had to work on the farm.
Everybody
I don't
had their
care.
chores. And where I really took a lot of just oddity that didn't make sense, it actually was the very ending for me. Mm-hmm. Because in the beginning, this family is banished from the fort, so to speak, the town, because they were considered bad luck. And that's not unheard of at that time. What was interesting to me is when the eldest daughter, the family is gone, and she finally says, I'm selling my soul to Satan. She goes and joins a coven made up of women from the town. I'm like, where did you get that from?
And
there was never an inkling.
No,
of those
and
women.
then how would she have known about them in the first place?
Yes, and it
unless
wasn't the call.
The devil told her. I mean, there was no indication of that.
Unless there was a call, from the witches to her, like calls, like whatever. But it was just a bit unbelievable. That was the one part that interested me. Like, where did these women come from? How did this coven get formed?
Yeah, and instead of, concentrating on that whatsoever, you had 2.5 hours of Puritan life where, I'm sorry, if somebody watched my life from day to day, they'd be bored to tears, so it doesn't,
too.
It's like, yeah, we get up and we take a shower and we turn on our computer and our phone and we check messages. Oh, it's time to eat. I mean, that's your daily day.
It doesn't make a movie, and there was really no lead up to it. There was no inkling. They thought there was a witch in the woods, not these witches, not a coven, not, the devil being physically present in and of himself. When Black Phillip was present for her dedication to Lucifer, essentially, he shifted forms like a shapeshifter from the goat to the devil, to a man.
Which they did do a good job of making the devil be pretty hot. I will admit that much.
But after that, his role became very sidetracked, and it became about, her walking through the woods, and there is a coven.
Yeah.
Random coven.
And then they kind of sort of float up to the sky, and the movie ends.
Yeah.
So I don't know how on earth this inspired figure in Stephen King, unless he's afraid of day-to-day life.
Unless he's afraid of day-to-day life or witches in general. And
yeah.
If anybody knows, the lore and stuff, sure, there were elements of that.
Yeah.
Of kind of that New England witch versus a mountain witch.
And that brings up another point. They, supposedly the director had, gone into intensive research about witchcraft and all this stuff. And when you actually, and this was like supposed to be like a major thing, and it was in like, you know, articles about the movie and all this stuff,
Yep.
when in reality he looked at one pamphlet. I don't know about you, but one pamphlet from Salem is not extensive research.
No, it's not. And what really was lost was the social aspect of Salem. Yes, there were, you know, the witches.
Yes.
The witches. Where they accused them of drying up the cow's milk or ruining the crops
Or illness, or whatever it is you want to accuse
the
a witch
mania.
of. Yeah.
The mania that really was, you know, kind of that solidifying factor in Salem. Yes, you can talk about that in a pamphlet. That was not the social aspect of why a lot of those women were accused and hanged.
No. And, you know, the pamphlet he looked at was supposed to be like a 1651 treatise on, like, you know, grimoire that wasn't even the Malleus Maleficarum.
Right.
So, what the heck? You know, I
Right.
mean, it just didn't make a lot of sense. And I really get kind of tired of marketing teams blowing up these things into something they're not.
Yes, and do your homework, but
Yeah.
do it more extensively if
Yeah.
you're really going to talk about what the myth of the witch
Or
was.
don't, you know, fib and say, oh, I researched extensively, when one pamphlet is not extensive research.
No.
Where extensive research is what you do when you're writing a, you know, doctoral thesis.
Exactly.
So, you know, be realistic. I mean, I don't, you know, discount the director. He made a film. He got it made. That's extremely hard to do.
Right.
He's also been doing a lot of other films, and The Lighthouse, his most recent film, is up for an Oscar. But ultimately, you know, in my opinion, he fibbed because one pamphlet is not extensive research.
It's not extensive research. And if you're really looking at the New England witch, what that mythos was, what that
It doesn't have
idea
anything to do
was.
with the Malleus Maleficarum,
No.
because the way witchcraft was presented in the United States was extensively different than what it was in Europe. So
Yes.
you're talking about two entirely different subsets.
I mean, you're talking, you know, two different points in history, or in two different regions in history,
Yeah.
and you really need to go back. It's not a generalization, because even the New England witch is very different from what you would see in the southern parts of America, what those witches were said to do.
And which
So,
we can actually talk about quite a bit, but
Right.
that's not what this video is about. This is about our review of The Witch, which I think you get the picture right now that we're not fans.
Not fans, except maybe for the goat.
Yeah, Black Phillip's cool.
I like the goat.
Yeah, so, you know, if you have seen another bad movie, or even a popular movie that you think is bad, comment down below if you want to see us do a review about it, because we'd be happy to do that.
Or if you even like the witch, then tell us why.
Yeah, because we are about discussions and talking about different viewpoints. It's not about really who's right and who's wrong.
Right.
It's that we all have a voice, and especially when it comes to film, that's the way you keep film going, is to keep having discussions about it.
Right.
So, with that, we'll leave you, and until next time,
Bye.